Meet Cassandra Evans, a gentle soul who believed she had found her forever in James Peterson. Little did she know that her husband was leading a double life with a woman who reveled in breaking hearts. Miranda Brooks. In the final act of betrayal, James demanded that his pregnant wife apologize to his mistress. The fallout was nothing short of catastrophic. This is the story of how Cassandra found the strength to fight back and won bigger than anyone ever imagined. Cassandra Evans grew up in the warm embrace of a loving family in the sleepy town of Willow Grove, with a population under 10,000. Willow Grove was the kind of place where everyone seemed to know one another's business. Yet despite the occasional nosiness of her neighbors, Cassandra always found solace in the community's kindness. They rallied together in times of need, celebrated life's milestones, and believed wholeheartedly in the sanctity of marriage. Raised by her parents, Douglas and Eleanor Evans, local hardware store owners, Cassandra learned the value of empathy, hard work, and loyalty. She was the oldest of 3 siblings, with younger twin brothers, Marcus and Mason. While the boys busied themselves with sports and pranks, Cassandra immersed herself in books. She grew to appreciate the power of words and the delicate complexities of human emotion. At the age of 20, eager to expand her horizons, she left Willow Grove for the bustling city of Greenfield. She had gained admission to a reputable university on an academic scholarship, majoring in communications. Bright-eyed and hopeful, Cassandra juggled part-time work at a local cafe to make ends meet. Those years were both liberating and challenging, but she never once forgot her roots, nor did she lose sight of her dream to build a stable family of her own, one that mirrored the love and respect she witnessed between her parents. It was around this time that she met James Peterson. He was 3 years older, working in a junior executive position at a real estate firm. Her friend Laura Kim, who studied business with him, introduced them during a university charity gala. James seemed by all accounts like a catch. He was polished, carried himself with an air of confidence, and had a polite charm that easily won people over. His conversation with Cassandra that evening glided effortlessly from topic to topic: art, travel, family, dreams. Over the next few months, they discovered shared values. Both wanted to start families someday, both admired strong family ties, and both dreamed of stable futures, unblemished by the heartbreak they had each witnessed in other people's relationships. Their romantic courtship was peppered with thoughtful dates, musicals at the local theater weekend, picnics by the lake, and cozy evenings spent cooking simple dinners in Cassandra's humble off-campus apartment. After 2 years of dating, James proposed in the most romantic of ways, kneeling on the same lake shore where they often picnicked. He had a ring fashioned with a small diamond surrounded by tiny emeralds, Cassandra's birthstone. Tears of joy wet her cheeks as she said, yes. Their marriage, held in her hometown of Willow Grove, was a modest but heartfelt ceremony. Surrounded by close friends and family, they exchanged vows that promised unwavering devotion. For the first 5 years, it truly was bliss. James's career soared. He transferred from junior positions to managerial ones, often traveling to meet clients for the real estate company, Midtown Realty Group. Cassandra advanced in her own line of work as well. Initially, she took an internship at a local broadcasting station, eventually working her way up to become a content editor for a lifestyle website. Financially, they were stable, even thriving. They bought a small but cozy condo near James's office building. Cassandra's parents, now aging, visited occasionally, proud of the life their daughter had built. The couple discussed starting a family, yet had waited for the right time due to busy work schedules, and James's constant business trips, unbeknownst to Cassandra, cracks began to form beneath the pristine surface of their marriage. James was charming and doted on her, but he had a weakness for recognition and the thrill of new conquests. With success came temptation parties with big names in real estate, mingling with ambitious newcomers to the industry, and the comfort of hotel bars after long days of negotiations. James's travel schedule provided ample opportunity for indiscretions. At first, the changes were subtle. James worked longer hours, returned from trips seemingly distant, carried his phone everywhere, even to the bathroom. Then, the once thoughtful gestures like calling her at midday to say he loved her dwindled to near extinction. Still, Cassandra believed in the man she married. She chalked it up to stress at work, telling herself they would return to the love-laced days of old, once life slowed down. Everything shifted drastically when Cassandra, after quietly suspecting she might be pregnant, took an at-home test that came out positive. Elated, she awaited James's return from a weekend trip, imagining how she would surprise him with the news. She planned it meticulously, a candlelit dinner at home, soft music playing, and a little onesie with the words, "Hello, Daddy," embroidered on it, which she'd place at the center of the table. She imagined his joyous tears the promise of a new chapter, bringing them closer than ever, but life seldom goes according to plan. And this seemingly perfect couple had no idea that a storm was about to upend their entire world. James's flight from Chicago arrived late that Sunday evening. It was nearly 10 when Cassandra heard the keys jingling at the condo door. She hurried to greet him, brimming with excitement. They had texted intermittently during the day, but James had seemed distracted. He shrugged it off as last-minute meeting requirements and flight delays. He stepped inside, looking worn but handsome in his crisp navy suit. Cassandra noticed a faint perfume on him that she didn't recognize. For a moment, her heart gave a tiny lurch of concern. She pushed it aside. People could brush up against others in crowded airports, or maybe the flight attendant's perfume lingered. She told herself there had to be a reasonable explanation. On the dining table, the candles flickered softly, illuminating a modest spread of homemade pasta and salad. The little onesie was neatly placed in a small gift box in front of James's plate. Even through her simmering questions, Cassandra's excitement overshadowed her suspicions. "I have a surprise for you," she said. Guiding him to the table, James's face lit up a fraction. "This is nice," he murmured, taking in the scene. Yet something about his demeanor was off-tense. He loosened his tie and forced a tired smile. When he opened the box, he stared at the tiny garment. For a split second, Cassandra thought she saw a flash of panic in his eyes, before his expression softened into a grin. "You're pregnant?" he asked, voice laced with disbelief. Cassandra nodded, tears sparkling. "I found out yesterday. I wanted to tell you in a special way." He stepped forward, drew her into a half-hearted hug, and whispered, "That's wonderful news." But Cassandra sensed some hesitation in his tone, as if his mind was elsewhere. In the days that followed, James's behavior became increasingly erratic. One moment he was doting, offering to bring her herbal teas or reading through parenting books with genuine curiosity. The next he was glued to his phone, texting or calling at odd hours, walking into different rooms for privacy. Cassandra felt a prickly sense of unease every time she caught him lying about mundane details like where he had lunch or why he had come home an hour later than he claimed. She tried to dismiss her worries. After all, she was pregnant now, and stress was the last thing she needed. But the seeds of suspicion had already been planted, and they began to grow nourished by each small lie or evasion. To clear her mind, Cassandra confided in her close friend, and former college roommate, Laura Kim. Over coffee at a trendy cafe, Cassandra explained how James's mood, swings, and secrecy were getting under her skin. Laura listened intently, stirring her latte, her expression growing more concerned. Sometimes he'll go to the balcony to talk, Cassandra said, her voice trembling slightly. And when I walk into the room, he hangs up immediately, or switches apps on his phone. I don't want to be that wife who snoops, but I can't shake the feeling. Laura pursed her lips, leaning in closer so others wouldn't overhear. Look, Cassie, you have to trust your instincts. If something feels off, it probably is. That doesn't mean you confront him with accusations right away, but you should keep your eyes open. Cassandra thanked her friend for the advice, but remained torn. A part of her wanted proof before making any allegations. Another part wanted to believe James was simply stressed. After all, the real estate market had been volatile lately, and a baby on the way was a huge life change. Yet the more she observed his habits, the less convinced she became of his innocence. One evening, she quietly approached the bedroom door while James was on a call. She overheard him speaking in hushed tones. I told you I'd handle it. She doesn't suspect anything serious. Not yet. Just keep calm. Those words cut through her like a knife. Who was he speaking to in such a secretive manner? And what exactly was he handling? Unable to sleep, Cassandra lay awake, pondering every possible scenario. Was it a business deal gone wrong? A personal debt he hadn't mentioned? Or her heart pounded at the thought, was there another woman? Her worries intensified when small clues began to surface. A lipstick stain on a shirt collar, a hotel room key for a night. He supposedly stayed at a colleague's condo. Text messages that he claimed were from his boss, yet were written in a flirtatious tone. The pregnancy, once a beacon of hope, now felt overshadowed by a looming black cloud of betrayal. Before she jumped to conclusions, Cassandra decided she needed actual evidence. She borrowed an old phone from Laura and discreetly installed a simple GPS tracker app on James's phone, a step that felt utterly invasive, but also necessary for her own peace of mind. She rationalized her choice by telling herself that if she found nothing, then she would breathe a sigh of relief and never speak of it again. However, the day after installing the tracker, Cassandra watched in dismay as James's location pinged at a fancy downtown hotel at 9 in the evening, on a night he claimed he'd be working late at the office. Her heart sank like a stone. She wanted to call him immediately, but her hands shook too much to hold the phone steady. Desperate for answers, she found herself scrolling through social media. A new account under the name Miranda Brooks popped up as a suggested friend. The account's profile picture was a sultry shot of a woman with caramel brown hair and a striking gaze. She listed her workplace as freelance real estate consultant. Cassandra clicked only to discover an array of glamorous photos featuring expensive dinners, business trips, and a certain recurring man in the background, James Peterson. The puzzle pieces began to fit. The late-night phone calls, the odd perfume, the suspicious texting. James was having an affair, and this Miranda Brooks was likely the other woman. Overwhelmed Cassandra found tears rolling down her cheeks. She placed a hand protectively over her belly, feeling the life growing inside her. How could the man she loved betray her like this, especially now of all times? 2 days after discovering the damning GPS location and Miranda's social media profile, Cassandra gathered her courage to confront James. She arranged a quiet dinner at home, hoping privacy would allow them to speak freely. However, James walked in that evening with a flurry of excuses. He claimed last-minute emails demanded his immediate attention, forcing him to shut himself in the study. Cassandra gave him space, but her anger simmered. She looked at the half-cooked dinner on the stove. Her appetite gone. After an hour of waiting, she marched into the study where James hunched over his laptop, frowning at the screen as though it held the world's problems. He glanced up, startled. "Cass, I'm really busy." "Can it wait?" Her response was surprisingly calm. "No, it can't. We need to talk." Her voice must have betrayed her turmoil, because James set his laptop aside. "Is everything okay?" Cassandra crossed her arms. "Does the name Miranda Brooks mean anything to you?" James blinked his face, momentarily devoid of expression. Then a flicker of recognition passed through his eyes. "She's a consultant we've worked with on a few real estate deals." Why, heart-pounding, Cassandra kept her gaze locked on his. "I saw her social media photos. You're in quite a few of them, looking more than just business associates." His jaw set in a rigid line. "You've been snooping." "Yes, I have," she replied, her voice trembling. "When my husband comes home with suspicious perfume on him, disappears to questionable locations and lies about it, I feel justified. I'm pregnant, James, and I deserve the truth." He rose from the chair, exhaling slowly. "Okay, I won't lie to you anymore. Miranda and I have been seeing each other." Hearing the confirmation out loud felt like a punch to her stomach. Cassandra leaned against the desk for support, tears brimming. How could you do this? How long James had the decency to look ashamed? It started about 6 months ago. We got close during some out-of-town conferences. Cassandra stared at him in disbelief. 6 months ago meant he'd been cheating on her for nearly half a year, all while they were discussing starting a family. "Is she the reason you've been distant? The reason you keep lying to me?" He nodded, his voice stilted. "But it's complicated. I love you, Cassandra. I really do." In a surge of heartbreak-fueled rage, she hurled the nearest object, a pen holder, across the room. "Don't you dare say you love me after what you've done. I'm carrying your baby, James. A baby you swore you wanted as much as I did." A tortured expression twisted his features. "I never wanted to hurt you or this child. It just happened, and I got in over my head." Cassandra wiped away angry tears. "Affairs don't just happen. You made a choice. Multiple choices every day. Do you have any idea what you've put me through?" James tried to approach her, but she stepped back. "Stay away from me. I can't even look at you right now." He let out a heavy breath. "So, what now? Do you want a divorce?" Her mind spun with possibilities. Divorce, separation, or perhaps therapy. She had always believed marriage vows were sacred, but she never expected to be betrayed so profoundly. "I don't know," she whispered. "I need time to think." The next few days were a haze. Cassandra took some time off work, citing pregnancy-related stress, which was only half a lie. She holed up at Laura's apartment for a while, confiding in her friend between sobbing fits. Meanwhile, James slept at their condo alone, calling her repeatedly, texting apologies, promising he'd end it with Miranda. The heartbreak wasn't just emotional, but physical too. Cassandra's appetite waned, and she struggled to keep food down. She worried about the baby. At a routine checkup, her doctor advised her to manage her stress levels, warning that elevated anxiety could affect her pregnancy. It was the wake-up call she needed, determined to protect her child. Cassandra returned to the condo, telling James that if they had any chance of salvaging their marriage, he'd have to cut all ties with Miranda. Immediately, James promised he would. He even handed over his phone to show that he had deleted Miranda's number and blocked her on all social platforms. Despite the betrayal, A small part of Cassandra wanted to believe him. This was her husband, the father of her unborn child. Could they possibly rebuild? For a moment, it seemed plausible. James accompanied her to prenatal checkups, talking about future nursery decorations, and even reading a parenting book before bed. Cassandra's heart softened, if only slightly. Maybe they could move past this. Then Miranda Brooks reappeared in their lives, like a tempest refusing to be tamed. She texted James, emailing him relentlessly, claiming that he couldn't just throw her away after everything Cassandra found out when she intercepted an email that popped up on James's phone at breakfast. The subject line read, "You owe me furious." Cassandra confronted James again. "What is this?" she demanded, brandishing the phone. James rubbed his temples. "She's not taking no for an answer. I'm not responding. I swear I'm not." A series of expletive-laden messages from Miranda followed, each more threatening than the last. She hinted at exposing James's infidelity to business associates, turning up at their condo, and even confronting Cassandra directly. James tried to reason with Miranda, but each attempt only fueled her anger. What Cassandra didn't know was that Miranda had her own set of motives, beyond romance motives, that would soon culminate in a bizarre demand. An apology from Cassandra. To her it started as a single text. "Your wife owes me an apology." Sent in the middle of the night, it displayed on James's phone with a jarring insistence. He read it, staring at the screen in disbelief. Cassandra, disturbed by the phone's glow, rolled over. "What is it now?" she asked wearily. He showed her the text. "She's lost it," he muttered. "She says you owe her an apology." Cassandra sat up, outraged. What on earth could I possibly owe her an apology for? Over the next few days, the messages from Miranda became a flood, mixing threats with bizarre pleas for redemption. In her twisted worldview, she blamed Cassandra for standing in the way of her happiness with James. She claimed that Cassandra's refusal to divorce James was unfair, considering he was never truly faithful. Miranda's brand of logic was as toxic as it was baffling. She was the mistress, yet she positioned herself as a victim. One evening, James arrived home, visibly shaken. He shut the door, checking behind him, as though someone might be following. Cassandra stood in the kitchen, finishing a cup of tea. "What happened?" she asked. Miranda showed up at my office. He said, his voice trembling. "She caused a huge scene, screaming about how I'd promised her a future." My boss heard everything. It was humiliating, to say the least. Cassandra felt a strange combination of anger and pity. "She's unhinged," she declared, placing her cup on the counter. "We need to consider legal protection, like a restraining order." James shook his head. "I don't want to escalate matters. I just want her out of our lives." It was the very next day that Miranda showed up at their condo. Despite the security guards' best efforts to keep her out, Cassandra opened the door to find Miranda standing there, posture, rigid eyes ablaze. She wore a tight-fitting red dress and reeked of desperation. "I need to talk to James." "Miranda!" snapped, trying to push past Cassandra. Cassandra blocked the doorway. "He's not here. And even if he were, you're not welcome." Miranda's lips curled into a sneer. "So this is the wife," she said, looking Cassandra up and down. "I thought you'd be prettier." Normally such a dig would have rolled off Cassandra's back, but in her vulnerable state, it stung. "You need to leave," she repeated firmly. Adrenaline surging as Miranda's eyes flickered toward Cassandra's pregnant belly. A strange, almost feral expression crossed her face. "Carrying James's baby doesn't make you special. I could have given him children, better ones than you ever could." Before Cassandra could retort, Laura, who had come over to check on her friend, suddenly appeared in the foyer. "Leave or I'm calling the police." Laura said sharply. With a final glare, Miranda turned on her heel and stormed off. Cassandra's heart pounded as she locked the door. She felt an odd mix of relief and terror. It was clear that Miranda was dangerously fixated, and there was no telling what she might do next. However, the darkest twist was yet to come. That evening, James paced the living room phone, in hand, pale as a ghost. Cassandra, exhausted, was about to head to bed when James blocked her path. "Miranda threatened to accuse me of harassment if I don't comply with her demand," he said quietly. She wants you to apologize to her publicly." Cassandra's breath caught in her throat. "She wants me, the pregnant wife, to apologize to her, the mistress." He nodded, eyes full of panic. "She said she'll go to the media, claim I manipulated her, or worse, she could cost me my job. I could lose everything, Cass." A flare of anger lit Cassandra's features. "What about what I lose? My dignity, my self-respect." James reached for her shoulders. "I'm not saying we should do it. I'm just telling you what she said. She's threatening to make false allegations. Lawsuits. She's even hinted at going after you, saying you've slandered her by calling her unhinged." Cassandra's entire body trembled. "So to be clear, you're considering forcing your pregnant wife to apologize publicly to your mistress just to save your skin." James dropped his gaze. "I don't know what to do. My boss is already furious at the office scene." She paused. "If she brings more drama, I'm finished." Silence engulfed the room. Cassandra stared at him, feeling her heart shatter all over again. She realized in that moment that James's love for her was overshadowed by his fear of losing his job, his reputation, and his precious status. She spoke through gritted teeth. "You've put me through hell, James. Now you have the nerve to ask me to degrade myself to protect you from the consequences of your own actions." James looked torn. "If we don't do something, she's going to ruin us both. Maybe we can fake it. Just something small. A statement that might placate her." Cassandra locked her jaw. "Absolutely not." Yet the threats escalated over the next week. Miranda sent emails not just to James, but also to Cassandra's workplace claiming defamation. She posted cryptic messages on social media hinting at a real estate scandal that would blow up soon. James's boss called him into a meeting, warning him to get his personal matters under control, or else face termination. Faced with the very real possibility of financial and social ruin, James made a choice that would forever change Cassandra's view of him. He cornered her in the bedroom one evening, voice trembling with desperation. "You need to apologize to her," he said, eyes wild. "Just a short statement online, or maybe in person. We'll record it and send it to her. That's what she wants." Cassandra stared at him in horror. "You can't be serious. How dare you even suggest? I know it sounds insane, but I can't lose my job. We have a baby on the way. Think about our future." "Our future." Cassandra repeated, her tone incredulous. "There is no future if you force me into this." Her words seemed to fall on deaf ears. James gripped her hands. "Please just do it for me. For us against every instinct in her body." Cassandra agreed to a single meeting with Miranda, hoping she could reason with her. But reason proved futile in the face of a woman who saw only her own entitlement. And so the stage was set for the most humiliating act of Cassandra's life. The meeting took place in a small upscale cafe on the outskirts of town. The choice was Miranda's, who insisted on privacy away from the city centre. Cassandra could hardly contain her resentment as she arrived with James, each step feeling like a march toward her own mortification. Inside, Miranda was already seated at a corner table, a smug expression etched across her delicate features. She wore a sleek black dress hair styled immaculately, as though she were preparing for a magazine photo shoot. The sight of her made Cassandra's stomach churn. James pulled out a chair for Cassandra, but she refused his gesture and sat down stiffly. "Let's get this over with," Cassandra said, crossing her arms protectively over her belly. Miranda smiled, though her eyes were cold. "How sweet of you to join me." "Cassandra," she drawled, "I've been looking forward to our little chat." Cassandra bit back a retort. She could sense James's tension, and her own heart was pounding. She remembered the doctor's warning about stress, but she had no choice. This confrontation was inevitable. "So you want an apology?" Cassandra began, her voice brittle. "For what exactly?" Miranda leaned forward, playing with the straw in her iced latte. "Where do I start?" "For starters, for your husband's lies, blaming me for a situation he created, and for trying to paint me as some crazed stalker," James attempted to intervene. "Miranda, you know that." She cut him off with an elegant wave of her hand. "I'm speaking to Cassandra." Cassandra's anger flared. "You pursued a married man. You threatened me, insulted me, and now you're demanding I apologize for ruining your fantasy." Miranda shrugged. "James, and I shared something real. You, on the other hand, are clinging to a marriage that was never solid to begin with. If you'd just step aside gracefully, none of this would be necessary." Trembling with rage, Cassandra fixed Miranda with a steely gaze. "You're delusional. James is my husband, and I'm pregnant with his child. It's not me who needs to step aside." Miranda's lips curled into a predatory smile. "A child he never even told me about. He kept so many secrets. And that's your fault. You caged him." Cassandra felt as if she were conversing with a brick wall. "I'm done. This is nonsense." She began to rise from her seat, but James grabbed her arm, desperation flickering in his eyes. "Please, Cass." She froze, tears threatening. She realized that James was truly forcing her to bend to Miranda's will for the sake of damage control. In a moment of excruciating humiliation, Cassandra sank back into the chair. "Fine. If this is what you need to move on," she said, her voice trembling with suppressed fury. "I'll say I'm sorry for whatever you feel I've done to you." Miranda's eyebrows shot up. She pulled out her phone. "I want it recorded." James swallowed hard, shooting Cassandra a pleading look. She shut her eyes, forcing herself to breathe. Then, with Miranda's phone camera aimed at her, she spoke words that tasted of ash. "Miranda, I apologize for any part I played in making you feel unappreciated or wronged. I'm sorry if I ever judged you unfairly." It was a hollow statement, but Miranda's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. She stopped recording and placed the phone back into her purse. Now was that so hard? Cassandra stood abruptly, tears trailing down her cheeks. "I hope you're satisfied." Miranda gave a casual shrug. "We'll see if I decide this apology is enough. Maybe I won't escalate things." James turned to Miranda, voice strained. "Please let this be the end of it. You have your apology. Don't make things worse for everyone." Miranda smirked. "I'll consider it." As Cassandra stormed out, the world outside felt both surreal and suffocating. Anger and betrayal pulsed through her veins. How had it come to this? She had gone from a loving wife, excited about her first child, to a broken woman, compelled to apologize to her husband's mistress. Upon reaching the sidewalk, she leaned against a lamppost, tears blurring her vision. Laura, who had been waiting in a nearby car for moral support, rushed over. "Oh my God, Cass, are you okay?" Cassandra shook her head, sobs escaping her. "I did it, Laura. I actually apologized to that." That Laura enveloped her in a hug. "You did what you felt you had to." James caught up to them, his face etched with guilt. "Cassandra, wait." But she spun around, fury blazing through her tears. "Don't you dare speak to me right now. I hope you realize what you've done." With that, she ducked into Laura's car, and they drove off, leaving James standing helpless on the curb. Cassandra tried to compose herself, but inside, she knew this marriage, the marriage she once cherished, was irreparably shattered. The night after the forced apology, Cassandra slept fitfully. Each time she closed her eyes, she relived the moment in that cafe. Miranda's smug smile, James's silent acquiescence. She woke the next morning feeling drained and hollow, as though the baby inside her was the only thing tethering her to reality. That day, she made a decision she never thought she would. She reached out to a divorce attorney. Her name was Penelope Morris, an old acquaintance of Cassandra's father. Douglas, Penelope had a reputation for being tough, compassionate, and relentless in defending her clients, precisely the ally Cassandra needed. Penelope agreed to meet Cassandra at her office. Sitting in a minimalist waiting area lined with law textbooks, Cassandra clutched a folder containing evidence screenshots of Miranda's threatening messages, emails she had sent to Cassandra's workplace, and logs from the GPS tracker showing James's suspicious hotel visits. When Penelope entered, her presence was instantly calming. She was an older woman in a smart navy suit, silver hair swept into a neat chignon. After introductions, they settled in her office. Cassandra inhaled shakily. "I never imagined I'd be here. But I can't live like this anymore." Penelope folded her hands on the desk. "I understand. Why don't you start from the beginning? Tell me everything." Cassandra poured out her story, how she and James met the affair, the pregnancy, Miranda's demands, and ultimately the humiliating apology. Penelope listened intently, occasionally jotting down notes. "I won't sugarcoat this," Penelope said once Cassandra finished. "Divorce can be messy, especially when finances, potential reputational damage, and a child are involved. But from what you've told me, you have a solid case for significant damages. Emotional distress, potential defamation from the mistress, and a betrayal from James that led to a toxic situation." Cassandra felt a flicker of hope. "I just want to protect my baby and get out of this nightmare." Penelope nodded. "We can petition for full custody once the baby is born, or at least primary custody, with a robust support arrangement. But we'll need to gather more documentation, income statements, financial records, anything that can help us clarify your entitlement." The next hurdle was telling James. When Cassandra returned to the condo later that evening, her resolve hardened. She found James in the living room, fiddling with his phone. He looked up, relief washing over his features. "Where were you?" "I've been worried." She placed her bag down calmly. "I went to see a lawyer." "James." His eyes widened. "A lawyer? Yes, I'm filing for divorce." Those words hung in the air like a thunderclap. James's face paled. "Cassandra. Wait, it doesn't have to come to that?" "Aye." She held up a hand. "It does. You made me apologize to your mistress, James. That's not just a betrayal. It's cruelty." He lunged forward, desperation in his eyes. "I told you. I was desperate. I was afraid of losing my job, everything I've worked for. I never wanted things to go this far." Cassandra's voice cracked. "You never wanted it to go this far, yet you let it. You cheated on me while I was pregnant. Lied to me for months. and then forced me to grovel before your mistress. You call that love?" He sank onto the couch, head in his hands. "I don't know what to say. I've messed up. I know I did. I'll do anything to fix this." Her jaw clenched. "It's too late. I need to put myself and this baby first." She turned to leave. James scrambled up, following her into the bedroom. "Cass, please. We can go to counseling. I'll quit my job if that's what it takes." Her throat tightened. For a brief, fleeting second, she recalled the good times, the shared dreams, the laughter, the love that once shimmered between them. But the memory of Miranda's triumphant smirk and James's willingness to degrade her overpowered any nostalgic longing. "There's no going back from what you've done," she murmured, gathering a few essential items into a suitcase. "I'm going to stay at Laura's place until the divorce is finalized. If you have any respect left for me, don't fight me on this." James looked shattered, tears forming in his eyes. But Cassandra steeled herself. She couldn't afford to let sentimentality cloud her judgment. With one last glance, she walked out the door, leaving James alone in the home that once symbolized their love. A new chapter had begun for Cassandra, though she entered it heavy with sorrow and anger. Every part of her heart ached, but a glimmer of liberation coursed through her veins. By taking control of her fate, she was honoring not just herself, but also the life growing inside her. Little did she know that fortune was about to favor her in ways neither she nor James could have anticipated. Over the following weeks, Cassandra threw herself wholeheartedly into building her case. Under Penelope Morris's guidance, she documented every harmful incident, the forced apology screenshots of Miranda's threats, evidence of James's ongoing infidelity, and financial records showing his ability to pay substantial spousal support. Simultaneously, Penelope prepared an airtight argument for full custody of the unborn child. While typically custody wasn't settled before birth, Penelope wanted it on record that Cassandra intended to safeguard her child from a toxic environment. It was unconventional but necessary, given the extent of James's betrayal and Miranda's disruptive presence. James, after being served divorce papers, responded with a mixture of panic and remorse. His own attorney attempted to negotiate a settlement out of court, but Cassandra, fueled by righteous anger and the need to protect her future, refused any half measures. One afternoon, James called her voice, trembling. "Look, I'll agree to almost anything, Cassandra, but please don't drag me through the mud, publicly. I'm already at risk of losing my position at Midtown Realty." Cassandra gripped the phone, her belly now significantly round. "You should have considered the consequences before forcing me to apologize to your mistress, James. I'm done protecting your image." A part of her felt guilty. She had once loved this man deeply, but she reminded herself of all the nights she cried alone, all the humiliations, all the fear for her unborn child. She steeled her resolve. The first hearing took place in a nondescript family courthouse in downtown Greenfield. Cassandra, dressed in a simple black maternity dress, clutched a folder of documents. Penelope stood beside her, exuding quiet confidence. James arrived in a tailored suit, looking 10 years older than he had just a few weeks ago. Dark circles rimmed his eyes, and he kept glancing nervously around the corridor. Miranda, somewhat surprisingly, also appeared in the hallway, though she lacked standing in the official proceedings. She hovered near James, occasionally whispering in his ear. Cassandra caught fragments of her comments, snide remarks about Cassandra's pregnancy, about how unfairly she was treating James. When the judge finally appeared, everyone filed into the small courtroom. Cassandra felt her heart hammer against her ribcage. Though no formal custody orders would be issued, until after the baby's birth they could establish preliminary arrangements and glean the judge's stance on spousal support and property division. Penelope presented Cassandra's case systematically. She highlighted the marriage's breakdown due to James's infidelity, his reckless actions that subjected Cassandra to emotional distress, and the various documented threats from Miranda. She emphasized Cassandra's pregnancy, her need for financial and emotional stability, and the intangible damage done by forcing Cassandra to publicly apologize to a mistress. James's attorney tried to mitigate the damage. He argued that James's affair, while regrettable, didn't negate his rights to co-parent. He insisted that James had the means and the willingness to provide for the child should Cassandra be willing to share custody. The judge, an older man with wire-rimmed glasses, listened impassively. However, when Penelope produced screenshots of Miranda's messages, including her demands and threats, the judge's expression turned grim. "I need more time to review this evidence," he said, glancing at James. "But I take these allegations of coercion and harassment very seriously, particularly given the emotional duress Mrs. Peterson faced during pregnancy. This will weigh heavily in my decisions regarding spousal support and custody arrangements." Outside the courtroom, tension crackled like static in the air. Miranda glared at Cassandra with open disdain, while James hovered uncertainly, torn between loyalty to his mistress and regret for losing his wife. Cassandra wanted nothing more than to escape the toxic atmosphere. Over the next few weeks, negotiations continued. James's attorney floated various settlement offers, ranging from generous spousal support to property buyouts. It was clear that James was desperate to avoid a drawn-out legal fiasco. His reputation at Midtown Realty was already precarious, and a public scandal could end his career altogether. Meanwhile, Cassandra soldiered on through her pregnancy. She leaned heavily on Laura and her family for emotional support. Douglas and Eleanor Evans, her parents, visited from Willow Grove, offering encouragement and practical help in setting up a nursery wherever she might eventually settle. As her due date inched closer, Cassandra sensed James's anxiety peak. He called her again, voice laced with desperation. "Cass, can we meet? Without lawyers, just to talk." After consulting with Penelope, Cassandra agreed to a meeting at a neutral location, a small conference room in Penelope's law firm. Though their lawyers would be nearby, she and James were allowed to speak alone if they wished. When she arrived, James was already there. Pacing, Miranda was conspicuously absent. The moment Cassandra stepped in, he rushed to pull out a chair for her. She eyed him warily, sinking into the seat. "What is it?" He sighed heavily, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "I want to settle this. I'll give you whatever you ask for. The condo, spousal support, child support. Just don't take away my right to see our child." Emotions tangled in Cassandra's chest. She remembered how he once read baby books with excitement in his eyes. She couldn't deny that beneath his betrayal, he might still love the unborn child. "I won't deny you visitation rights, unless the court deems it necessary," she said quietly. "But don't expect me to trust you overnight. This is about our baby's well-being." James nodded, seeming genuinely contrite. "I'll do whatever it takes." A few days later, the attorneys finalized a proposed settlement. Cassandra would receive primary physical custody once the baby was born, with James granted supervised visitation, at first due to concerns about Miranda's interference. James would pay substantial spousal support for a defined period, plus child support. The condo would be sold and proceeds split, but Cassandra had the option to request a larger share given her circumstances. Penelope, though skeptical of James's sincerity, advised Cassandra that the offer was strong. They could likely secure even more if the case went to trial. But it would drag on. Ultimately, Cassandra decided to accept choosing stability and closure over prolonged litigation. What followed next, however, was nothing short of poetic justice. A wave of karma destined to crash upon James and Miranda in spectacular fashion. Just days after the settlement was drawn up, Cassandra received a sudden frantic call from Laura. "Have you seen the news?" Laura asked, voice trembling with excitement and shock. Cassandra, who had just finished a prenatal checkup, frowned. "What news?" "Miranda's in trouble." "Big trouble," Laura declared. "Check the local business headlines." Cassandra quickly pulled out her phone, her heart pounding. The top article read, "Real estate consultant Miranda Brooks arrested for fraud." She scanned the article, eyes widening at every word Miranda had been forging, client signatures and pocketing funds from phony real estate deals for months. A sting operation had finally brought her to justice. A swirl of emotions coursed through Cassandra, relief, surprise, and an odd sense of validation melded together. She remembered the countless threats Miranda had flung her way, the smugness she exuded while demanding an apology. Now it seemed Miranda's own wrongdoing had caught up to her. Later that evening, James called his voice hoarse and panicked. "Cass, Miranda's been arrested. The company is launching an internal investigation. They're pulling me in for questioning about our relationship. They think I might be involved." Though Cassandra was no fan of James's predicament, she felt a certain catharsis in hearing the fear in his voice. "Are you involved?" she asked quietly, half dreading his answer. "No," he said quickly, "but they found emails where she discussed deals with me. I'm not sure how they'll interpret them. This could end my career." Cassandra gripped her phone. "I'm sorry for you, but this is not my battle anymore." Her mind flashed back to all the times James dismissed her concerns or put her in humiliating positions. Now he was dealing with the fallout of trusting someone so morally bankrupt. In the days that followed, James was temporarily suspended from Midtown Realty, pending a full investigation. Miranda, meanwhile, faced serious criminal charges. Local news outlets covered the story, extensively relishing the scandal that rocked the real estate world. As for Cassandra, she focused on her health and well-being, letting Penelope handle any residual legal matters. The baby's due date was fast approaching, and she found solace in the unwavering support of her family and friends. When Cassandra finally went into labor nearly 3 weeks ahead of schedule, she rushed to Greenfield Hospital, her parents and Laura by her side. Amid contractions and the flurry of nurses, she couldn't help but wonder if James would show up. He did. Disheveled pale, and clearly stressed, he arrived in the waiting room, only to find Laura glaring at him. "Don't you dare cause her any stress right now," Laura warned. James nodded, his eyes filled with desperation. "I'm just here to see my child." After an arduous 15-hour labor, Cassandra gave birth to a healthy baby girl. Tears of joy replaced the months of sorrow as she held the tiny infant in her arms. She named her Sophia, Grace Evans, choosing to give her child Cassandra's maiden name for the time being, an act symbolic of her independence from James. James, permitted by Cassandra, entered the room briefly to meet his daughter. Tears filled his eyes as he cradled Sophia, dwarfed by blankets. Cassandra watched from the hospital bed, emotions warring within her. She saw the genuine love in his eyes for his child, but she couldn't ignore the pain he had inflicted. Once Sophia was stable and Cassandra was resting, James pulled up a chair, hesitant. "She's beautiful," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. "You did amazing. Cass, Cassandra offered a small nod, exhaustion evident on her face. She is beautiful. She's the one good thing to come out of all this. He stared at the floor. I just want you to know. I'm sorry, so sorry. For everything. She didn't respond. What was there to say? She couldn't rewrite the past, nor could she absolve him of the choices he made. But for Sophia's sake, she hoped they could at least reach a place of civil coexistence. Not long after James faced further fallout at Midtown Realty, though the internal investigation cleared him of direct involvement in Miranda's fraud, his superiors viewed his relationship with her as a liability. They offered him a severance package to quietly resign. James's professional reputation took a devastating hit, making it difficult to secure another high-level position in the same industry. Cassandra, on the other hand, found a new momentum in her career. As her story quietly circulated through her network, she received an offer from a reputable online publication seeking a content editor. Her experiences lent her a deeper empathy, a newfound resilience that came through in her work. A few months later, at the final divorce hearing, the judge reviewed the updated circumstances. James had lost his high-paying job, but he still owed Cassandra the settlement, agreed upon spousal support, child support, and a share of the condo's proceeds. With Miranda's crimes and her humiliating demands now public record, the judge showed little sympathy for James. Cassandra walked out of that courtroom with full legal custody of Sophia, generous financial compensation, and the knowledge that she had stood up for herself, despite all odds. James, meanwhile, was left to pick up the pieces of his shattered ambitions. Gone were the days of unbridled career success. Gone was the image of a perfect marriage. He had reaped the consequences of his choices. The sweet note of karma played in Cassandra's ears as she stepped into the sunlight with her lawyer at her side, baby Sophia safe with her grandparents. She inhaled deeply, an overwhelming sense of relief and triumph washing over her. Though her heart still bore the scars of betrayal, Cassandra was free from the secrets, the lies and the toxic demands of a mistress with a twisted agenda. She had faced hell and walked out with her dignity, her future and her child's security intact. Cassandra's journey isn't just a story of betrayal, but a testament to the strength we discover when life hits us hardest. She endured the shock of infidelity, the humiliation of a forced apology, and the heartbreak of leaving the man she once loved. Yet through faith in herself and the love for her child, she claimed a better life, one marked by independence, healing, and a heart wide open to hope. If you found Cassandra's story gripping, if it stirred your emotions, made you root for her triumph, or reminded you of the power we each hold to reclaim our destiny, Millionaire took his mistress on a baby moon meant for his pregnant wife. The wife took his empire. Instead, they say some secrets are too ugly to stay hidden, and for millionaire businessman Marcus Donovan, that secret was about to explode in the middle of a picture-perfect life with his pregnant wife. Eleanor rumors started swirling. Another woman. Juliana was seen on a luxurious baby moon trip in the Mediterranean. But it was no innocent coincidence that trip had been planned for Eleanor. If only she knew how her world was about to change forever, or how she would rise like a phoenix from the ashes of betrayal to snatch the empire that Marcus believed was his alone. This is a twisted tale of karma's grand design. From the outside looking in, Marcus Donovan appeared to have every advantage. Born into a modest but loving family in the suburbs of Baltimore, he was raised by two hard-working parents who always pushed him to chase his dreams. His father, Gregory Donovan, labored at a local construction firm, while his mother, Martha Donovan, balanced 2 jobs as a part-time librarian and a seamstress. Despite their limited means, they poured every last drop of their energy into their only child's future. Marcus grew up witnessing their relentless dedication to forging a better life, and it shaped him into a man determined to succeed, no matter the cost. By the time he was in college at the University of Pennsylvania, majoring in business administration, Marcus was already known for his unmatched ambition. He interned at Anderson & Crowley, a well-regarded investment firm, where he had a knack for impressing powerful executives. They saw him not just as a bright mind, but as someone who could influence others with his charm. He had a disarming smile, a smooth voice, and a razor-sharp intellect. Everyone predicted his meteoric rise. It felt inevitable. It was during a university networking event that he met Eleanor Taylor, a graduate student in art history who was volunteering for the fundraiser. What started as a brief conversation about Renaissance art blossomed into an unanticipated bond. Eleanor's kind, unassuming spirit and genuine curiosity about life and culture captivated Marcus in ways he never experienced before. She came from a quiet, artistic family. Her mother, Lucinda Taylor, was a painter, and her father, Robert Taylor, taught music at a conservatory. Unlike Marcus's intense drive for business success, Eleanor dreamed of opening a small gallery to showcase her mother's and other emerging artists' work. Although their pursuits were seemingly dissimilar, the synergy between them was magnetic. Marcus loved that Eleanor's perspective gave him a refuge from the relentless hustle of his business environment. She, in turn, admired his ambition and believed in his potential to do great things. He gave her the confidence to dream bigger. She gave him the humility to remember that riches went far beyond what sat in a bank account. For a while, the relationship was pure bliss. Late-night study sessions, peppered with stolen kisses in the university library, romantic walks through Philadelphia's cobblestone streets, and unwavering support in each other's endeavors. Even as Marcus was pulled deeper into the world of high-stakes finance, he managed to carve out time for Eleanor. He promised her a future that glowed with love and adventure. "I'll give you the world," he would say, sealing it with a spontaneous weekend trip to some quaint bed and breakfast. Eleanor, an idealist at heart, believed in his vow wholeheartedly. When he proposed getting down on one knee in front of 100 flickering candles at her favorite local art gallery, she couldn't say yes fast enough. Their wedding in upstate New York was attended by family close friends and a smattering of powerful business connections that Marcus had made. It seemed like the start of a dream that would only grow more vibrant with time. But with the passage of years, the dream changed shape. As Marcus soared in his career, starting Donovan Capital Ventures and establishing connections with Silicon Valley elites, Wall Street executives, and international investors, the simple joys of everyday life slipped out of his reach. He and Eleanor were still deeply in love, but their time together dwindled. Business dinners, conferences, and networking events took precedence. Eleanor struggled with the sense that she was losing the man she had pledged her life to, though she tried her best to stay supportive. She started hosting art events to keep herself busy and to offer a platform for her mother's work. Yet she always tried to leave the front porch light on, hoping Marcus would come home early and remind her they were still the same people who once found refuge in each other's arms. Behind the polished veneer of success, cracks were forming, cracks that wouldn't show themselves until life took a dramatic, life-altering turn. A year into their new life of glittering galas and high roller gatherings, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant. She told Marcus one morning as he was rushing to finalize a major overseas deal. He was halfway out the door, coffee in one hand and a phone pressed to his ear, when she pulled him aside. eyes brimming with an anxious excitement. "Marcus," she said softly, "I'm pregnant." The moment froze. The phone call, the multi-million-dollar contract, waiting the business world swirling around him, it all faded. In that second, it was just him, Eleanor, and the promise of new life. He lifted her into his arms, tears of joy reflecting in both of their eyes. For the first time in a long time, the tension of business deals, deadlines, and responsibilities melted away. Life felt simple and hopeful again. Eleanor was 3 months pregnant when they decided to host a celebratory dinner at an upscale restaurant called the Redwood Lounge in Manhattan. They reserved a private room and invited their closest circle of friends and family, Marcus's parents. Gregory and Martha were there, beaming with pride. Eleanor's parents, Lucinda and Robert, were equally ecstatic. Champagne flowed, though Eleanor stuck to her sparkling grape juice. Amid toasts and laughter, Marcus promised again he would step back from the intensity of his schedule and be there for his growing family. He asked everyone to raise a glass and said, "To our unborn child and to the bright future we'll share." A wave of applause and cheers filled the room. In the weeks that followed, life felt like it was returning to that earlier state of bliss. Marcus took Eleanor to her doctor's appointments. He'd spend Saturdays helping her organize the spare room in their penthouse into a nursery. He even started thinking about a baby moon, a pre-birth vacation for them to unwind and connect before the baby arrived. Eleanor's face lit up when he proposed 2 weeks in the south of France. It was a grand romantic gesture that made her hopeful they were truly turning a corner. But the closer they got to finalizing the trip dates, the more frequently those old habits crept in. Marcus would be called away on urgent business, or else he'd lock himself in his home office for hours glued to conference calls with Hong Kong investors. His free time evaporated again. Eleanor worried that if this was the pattern before the baby even arrived, how would he adjust once a newborn demanded all their attention and energy? Nonetheless, she kept faith. She knew business deals could be unpredictable, especially when millions of dollars were at stake. She rationalized, "He's doing this for us. He wants to secure our future. He'll be there when it matters most." It was a mantra she repeated each night, even as she felt the creeping loneliness that threatened to overshadow what should have been the happiest time of her life. Marcus, on the other hand, juggled overwhelming stress from multiple fronts. Donovan Capital Ventures was in a prime expansion phase, and missing crucial deals could mean losing the momentum he'd built over a decade. He justified each missed doctor's appointment and each cancelled dinner by telling himself that once the deals were sealed, he'd have the money and reputation to provide a life of comfort, no luxury for Eleanor and their child. So he pushed on day after day, fueling himself with ambition and adrenaline, hardly noticing that he was accelerating toward a moral precipice. As Donovan Capital Ventures expanded, Marcus came into contact with an even wider circle of corporate bigwigs, international deal-makers and socialites. One such acquaintance was Lawrence Chen, an influential tech magnate who had a flair for elaborate parties. Through Lawrence, Marcus found himself invited to exclusive yacht soirees on the Mediterranean high-stakes poker nights in Macau and lavish ski trips in the Swiss Alps. All these gatherings promised not only entertainment, but also a direct line to the world's wealthiest decision-makers. It was at one of Lawrence's high-profile events that Marcus first encountered Giuliana Moretti. She was an Italian-Brazilian heiress with a well-known family name, rumored to be an aspiring fashion designer, tall and poised with a graceful yet predatory air. She was the kind of woman who seemed to float through a room, drawing every eye. Her conversation was as sharp as her appearance. She'd spent her youth studying in the finest boarding schools in Europe, and she spoke 4 languages fluently. She seemed genuinely intrigued by Marcus's success story, or at least that's how she presented herself. He first noticed her at a New York charity gala, swirling her champagne and laughing with a group of media moguls. Their eyes locked, and for a brief moment, Marcus felt that old spark of curiosity. She was mesmerizing in a way that was impossible to ignore. After a polite introduction, they engaged in small talk about the charity's mission. Within minutes, they pivoted to more personal topics: her upcoming fashion line, his global expansion strategies, her travels across Asia. Juliana lavished him with compliments that flattered not just his ego, but the deeper part of him that felt underappreciated and overstretched. She seemed to understand the pressures he was under, empathizing with the burden of steering a multi-million-dollar enterprise. Although he told himself it was harmless, Marcus began inviting Juliana to smaller get-togethers with key investors. He valued her social acumen and thought she could help lubricate business discussions with her grace and wit. One dinner turned into another. Soon casual texts about upcoming events drifted into more personal territory. Juliana was skilled at emotional lure, often sending messages late at night when Marcus's defenses were down. "I'm thinking of you. Hope you're getting some rest." Or, "You looked so stressed today. Remember to take care of yourself." Her words ignited a feeling of being seen and validated in a way he hadn't felt for months. The lines blurred so subtly that Marcus wasn't sure when their professional rapport shifted into a personal affair. Perhaps it was the night they attended an after-party in Monaco, where the champagne never stopped flowing, the music pulsed till dawn, and everyone else seemed consumed by their own indulgences. In a moment of disoriented excitement, Marcus found himself alone on a balcony with Juliana. The moon glistened on the sea below, and her perfume swirled around him like an intoxicating promise. Before he fully comprehended, they were locked in a passionate kiss. The guilt that followed was profound, yet not enough to halt what they had begun. He told himself it was a one-time slip. However, the affair continued clandestine, but thrilling, fueling him with a sense of danger and novelty that overshadowed the moral voice within. Each time he returned home to Eleanor, who was by then visibly pregnant and glowing with maternal radiance, he felt a dual wave of shame and heartbreak. He still loved Eleanor, or so he claimed, yet he couldn't shake the magnetism of Juliana, the adrenaline rush of their secret. Despite these pangs of conscience, he rationalized that it was his life too. He'd worked endlessly for success, so he had earned an escape from the daily grind. He believed that as long as Eleanor never found out, no harm was done. After all, he was still providing for his wife and child. He still intended to keep his promise of giving them everything, but in the hidden corners of his mind, even he couldn't ignore the flicker of trepidation. Some part of him knew that if Eleanor discovered his betrayal, it would unravel everything. By the 7th month of Eleanor's pregnancy, her doctor recommended a period of rest and relaxation. High blood pressure and stress were common in first-time mothers, and a calm environment could make all the difference. Eleanor, remembering Marcus's initial grand suggestion of a trip to the south of France, brought up the possibility again. Her voice carried a quiet plea. "You said we would go together, just you and me, before the baby arrives." He nodded absently, scanning through his phone's endless alerts. She cradled her expanding belly, waiting for him to look at her with warmth, waiting for the man she once knew to surface. Finally, he pressed his phone's screen off, right, of course. A baby moon. He smiled, but it felt forced. "Let me get my schedule in order, and we'll plan something special." Eleanor's face lit with hope. She felt a gush of relief that perhaps the old Marcus was still there under the layers of suits, spreadsheets, and urgent phone calls. She suggested a quaint coastal town in the south of France, perhaps Cassis or Antibes, somewhere quieter than the usual tourist hotspots. He agreed, half listening, half distracted by the beeping of another incoming message. Within days, however, business crises flared up like wildfires. An investor in Hong Kong threatened to pull out of a major deal. A West Coast tech company's stock was plummeting, which threatened Donovan Capital's stake. Conference calls spanned time zones. Meetings doubled, then tripled. Every day, Marcus found a new reason to postpone the trip. Just one more week, he kept promising. We'll head out as soon as I sort this out. Eleanor tried to remain patient. She decorated the nursery carefully, choosing pastel shades of green and yellow. She arranged for a local carpenter to craft a handmade crib. She even started prenatal yoga to maintain her health and manage her stress. Still, the longing to spend meaningful time with Marcus grew stronger, and the heartbreak of repeated postponements deepened. In the midst of that turmoil, a cunning idea crept into Juliana's mind. She knew all about the baby moon plan. Marcus had once carelessly mentioned it, not realizing how it might ignite her envy. Juliana wanted Marcus to herself, unencumbered by marital obligations or the looming presence of a child. She manipulated him, planting seeds of discontent and urging him to take her somewhere far from the prying eyes of the media and corporate watchers. For once, she wanted to see if Marcus would pick her convenience over his wife's rightful place. Marcus, exhausted and lured by the promise of unrestrained pleasure, found himself agreeing. In a moment of self-delusion, he convinced himself that a quick getaway with Juliana was a better move. He could merge leisure with networking, claiming that she had connections to an international fashion mogul who could become a valuable investor. In the twisted logic of a man who had already begun to tangle his moral compass, it seemed justifiable. So he booked the flights, 4 days in the south of France. Luxury suite at an exclusive resort in Cannes, complete with private beach access and a dedicated concierge. He told Eleanor he had to leave unexpectedly for a business emergency in Europe. She was nearly 8 months pregnant, but the heartbreak in her eyes didn't stop him. He packed his suitcase hurriedly one afternoon, gave her a tepid kiss on the cheek, and said he'd call every day. As Marcus and Juliana soared across the Atlantic, Eleanor was left alone in the penthouse, the baby moon brochures still on the kitchen counter, mocking the dream that was never realized. She felt a swelling ache in her chest, part anxiety, part suspicion. Although she wanted to believe him, cracks in her trust had begun to form. She sensed that something was off, but she couldn't yet piece it together. In Cannes, Marcus and Juliana basked in the sun, sipping on exotic cocktails under striped beach umbrellas. They indulged in gourmet meals, danced late into the night, and posted snippets of their lavish escapade on social media, albeit carefully curated, to avoid revealing each other's identities. Too blatantly, Marcus's official story was that this was a critical investor meeting. But in a world as interconnected as theirs, secrets can slip through the cracks faster than a wave receding on the shore. A paparazzo named Henri Lambert was trailing various celebrities that weekend. He was known for sniffing out the hidden corners where Europe's rich and famous frolicked away from public view. While scanning the beach for a rumored Hollywood couple, he stumbled upon Marcus Donovan and Juliana Moretti instead. At first, he couldn't believe his luck. Marcus Donovan was a rising star in the finance world, rumored to be squeaky clean and happily married. Yet here he was, comfortably entwined with a woman who was definitely not his pregnant wife. Henry snapped a flurry of photos, the two of them sipping wine on a balcony, Juliana leaning in to whisper in Marcus's ear a playful kiss on the cheek. None of it left any plausible deniability. Henry knew he had gold in his camera, a scandal involving a high-profile millionaire about to become a father. Tabloid heaven. He quickly sold the photos to a gossip website known as the Gold Coast Insider. Within hours, the pictures went viral. Social media platforms lit up with speculation. Who is this mystery woman? Where is his wife? The images were accompanied by headlines dripping with condemnation. Marcus Donovan's secret. Baby Moon with Mistress finance, mogul in a scandalous affair. Even mainstream news sites picked up the rumor mill Eleanor was home in New York, nursing an aching back and reading baby blogs when her phone buzzed non-stop. She opened one message to find a link from an old college friend. "Elle, please, tell me this isn't real." Followed by the incriminating photos. For a heartbeat, she felt like the ground caved in beneath her. The images showed Marcus in an unmistakably intimate pose with a glamorous brunette. Shock turned to devastation, then to rising anger. Betrayal scorched through her veins. She slumped on the living room couch, tears falling silently as she clutched her pregnancy bump. How could he do this to her, to them? Her phone calls to Marcus went unanswered. She tried texting him, but the messages remained unread. In a panic, she called her mother, Lucinda, who arrived within the hour, enveloping Eleanor in a maternal hug that momentarily soothed her shattered heart. Yet not even a mother's love could fully dull the sting of this calamity. The headlines were everywhere, and the story was unstoppable. When Marcus finally saw the tabloid news panic set in, he tried to contact his public relations team to mitigate the scandal, but the damage was already colossal. Investors started asking questions. His phone rang incessantly with messages from business partners, furious that this personal fiasco might tarnish their brand associations. Most of all, though, he dreaded hearing from Eleanor. He was 1,000 miles away, physically and emotionally, with no immediate plan to rectify the devastation he'd unleashed. Juliana, on the other hand, feigned worry, but secretly relished the storm. In her mind, this was an opportunity to force Marcus's hand. If his marriage was irrevocably damaged, he might choose her. She coaxed him, telling him that everything would be fine, that he could spin the narrative, but deep down she knew the path to power was lit up before her. Back in New York, Eleanor quietly fumed. It wasn't just heartbreak. It was a sense of betrayal that ignited a newfound resolve in her. She felt her unborn child move inside her, and that reminder filled her with fierce determination. The man she loved had humiliated her on a global stage. The father of her child had broken the final bond of trust. Through her tears, a seed of defiance began to grow. She would not crumble and be the sympathetic, powerless wife in this story. She would fight for her dignity and for her child's future. When Marcus returned to New York, the scandal was already raging. Eleanor met him in their penthouse, calm, composed, but with a steely gaze. "You've humiliated me," she said quietly. "You broke everything we built. I won't be a forgotten footnote in your story." Without drama or tears, Eleanor began to act. She may not have held financial power, but she knew her emotional and strategic contributions had helped shape Donovan Capital from the beginning. She hired Danielle Pierce, a formidable divorce lawyer, known for high-stakes corporate cases. Quietly they gathered evidence, financial records, contracts, early investments, all proving Eleanor's unseen influence in Marcus's empire. While Marcus focused on salvaging his image, Eleanor was preparing for war. Then came Juliana's twist, a sudden message claiming she was pregnant. Whether true or not, it rattled Marcus. But for Eleanor, it only fueled her resolve. She wasn't going to shield him anymore. With her baby due soon and the media still circling, Eleanor temporarily left the penthouse for her parents' quiet home. She wasn't retreating, she was regrouping. This time not as the betrayed wife, but as a woman ready to claim what was rightfully hers. As Eleanor's due date approached, the media frenzy refused to die down. Tongues wagged about whether she'd name Marcus as the father on the birth certificate if they proceeded with divorce. Stock in Donovan Capital Ventures dipped as rumors circulated that the founder was on the brink of losing control of his assets. Rival companies circled like sharks, ready to snap up clients or key employees who questioned Donovan Capital's stability. Under the weight of all these pressures, Marcus seemed to crumble. His once unshakable self-confidence slipped into desperation. He called Eleanor multiple times a day, begging for a face-to-face meeting. She granted him a single meeting under the watchful eye of her lawyer, Danielle Pierce, at a neutral location, a private conference room at Clark and Grayton. Law firm. When Marcus arrived, he looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, suit jacket hanging off his once proud shoulders. Eleanor, on the other hand, wore a simple navy maternity dress and radiated a quiet strength. She was mere weeks away from delivering her belly, a poignant reminder of all that was at stake. Marcus attempted a gentle approach. "Eleanor, I've made terrible mistakes," he said, voice trembling. "I want to fix this. I'll do whatever it takes." She studied him for a long moment, her eyes reflecting sorrow and disappointment. Danielle, seated beside her, remained silent, but watchful. Finally, Eleanor replied softly, "We cannot be fixed." "Marcus, you did not just break our vows, you shattered my trust. That is something I can't repair. I'm here to discuss a settlement only for the sake of our child's future." Marcus pleaded for a second chance, enumerating the ways he could make amends. He would cut off Juliana completely, vow fidelity, attend therapy. However, the time for contrition had passed. Eleanor made it clear she wanted a divorce, and not just a simple one. She wanted a fair share of the empire, citing her intangible but vital contributions to the business's growth. Danielle slid a carefully prepared document across the table, listing assets that would be put in Eleanor's name. It included a controlling stake of certain business ventures, real estate properties, and trust funds for the child. Marcus's face blanched. His initial reaction was disbelief, followed by anger. "This is absurd," he spat. "You have no right to dismantle my company." Danielle calmly explained the legal precedents supporting Eleanor's case. She detailed how the intangible contributions of a spouse could factor into a divorce settlement, particularly given the nature of how Donovan Capital Ventures expanded. She hinted at potential reputational damage if certain internal documents were made public. This was the final straw. The unspoken threat of financial audits, negative media attention, and investor flight made Marcus realize that losing a large portion of his empire might be unavoidable if he didn't negotiate. The meeting concluded in a cold standoff. Marcus stormed out, furious at Danielle, and by extension, furious at Eleanor. For her part, Eleanor left feeling both liberated and terrified. She was stepping into an unknown future, but at least she was no longer treading water in the whirlpool of Marcus's transgressions. She returned to her parents' home, trying to focus on her baby's imminent arrival, rather than the storm swirling around her. Eleanor went into labor on a quiet Sunday morning. The world outside was still enthralled with the scandal, but within the walls of Lucinda and Robert Taylor's home, all that mattered was bringing new life into the world. With her mother and a private doula by her side, Eleanor felt contractions that intensified by the hour Marcus received a call from Eleanor's mother, telling him that he could come to the hospital if he wished Eleanor had agreed for him to be present, not as her partner, but as the father of the child. Despite the tension, she believed their baby had the right to both parents at the birth. In a rush of guilt and paternal instinct, Marcus cancelled his meetings and raced to Mount Sinai Hospital. When he arrived, Eleanor was already in active labor, sweat beading on her forehead, breathing heavily through contractions. She acknowledged his presence with a nod. There was no forgiveness in her eyes, but there was also no malice at that moment. Whatever had passed between them, they were both there to welcome their child. After hours of determined pushing, baby Henry Donovan entered the world with a hearty cry. He had Eleanor's delicate features, but Marcus's intense gaze. Watching him take his first breath brought tears to Marcus's eyes, tears of awe, shame, and overwhelming emotion. Eleanor spent from the labor, cradled Henry gently, all her focus on this tiny being who held the promise of a new beginning. For a brief time, the hospital room seemed suspended in tranquility. Marcus murmured an apology to Eleanor, and she simply nodded, too exhausted to pass the complexities of their fractured relationship. The press inevitably got wind of the birth, but the hospital's security kept them at bay. Danielle discreetly arranged for an extended stay so Eleanor could recover, without the media circus camped outside her door. Yet the respite was short-lived. Once Henry was born, the details of the divorce settlement took on a new urgency. Even as he marveled at his newborn son, Marcus was bombarded by calls from his lawyers urging him to avoid signing away the empire. He faced a decision: risk a protracted legal battle that could drag on for years and wreak havoc on his business reputation, or meet Eleanor's demands for a settlement that would permanently alter his fortune. During one of Eleanor's quieter moments in the hospital, Marcus approached her. "I don't want to fight you in court. Our child shouldn't grow up watching us tear each other apart." Eleanor studied him, her expression neutral. She too didn't want a prolonged battle, especially with Henry's future to consider. She simply stated, "Then come to an agreement with Danielle. Stop trying to cling to power because in the end, you'll lose more than just money." In that moment, Marcus glimpsed anew. Eleanor resolved, resilient, and far from the naive, gentle soul he had once taken for granted. He recognized that she was not only fighting for her own dignity, but for the child they had brought into the world. Though a flicker of pride stirred in his heart at her strength, it was overshadowed by the realization that he was on the losing side of this battle. Morally, and soon financially, Eleanor Donovan sat in the back seat of a black SUV, its tinted windows shielding her from the flashbulbs that exploded along Manhattan's bustling sidewalks. Cradling baby Henry in her arms, she felt a surge of protectiveness and an equal measure of quiet determination. The day had finally come for her legal team to square off with Marcus and his lawyers. She gazed through the tinted glass at the soaring skyscrapers. Once this city had symbolized the pinnacle of her husband's ambition, now it was the stage on which she would fight for her dignity, her child's future, and a fair claim to the empire she had helped build. The legal battleground was the top-floor conference suite at Clark & Grayton law firm, a stately glass tower rising like a monolith of power in midtown Manhattan. Eleanor's lawyer, Danielle Pierce, was known in elite circles as the litigator you'd hire if you had everything to lose. She had already amassed hundreds of files, emails and financial statements that documented the many ways Eleanor had contributed directly or indirectly, to the expansion of Donovan Capital Ventures. And yet Danielle insisted on another layer of evidence, personal testimony about Eleanor's role behind the scenes. The intangible but crucial ways she had secured philanthropic deals and introduced Marcus to key art investors now held center stage in the negotiations. In the weeks leading up to the showdown, Danielle worked around the clock. She had enlisted the help of forensic accountants to comb through Donovan Capital's labyrinthine web of offshore companies and shell subsidiaries. Every questionable transaction that might hint at hidden funds or deliberate concealments was highlighted and sorted into neat binders. There were also frantic late-night calls with potential witnesses like the couple's longtime financial advisor, Richard Albright, who'd confided how Eleanor's early inheritance had covered some of Marcus's high-risk investments. Eleanor had never bragged about that early contribution. She had believed in her husband wholeheartedly and wanted to see his dreams come true, now that goodwill became proof of her rightful claim. Meanwhile, Marcus's legal team was scrambling to protect him. They were led by a seasoned corporate attorney named Vivian Hill, known for her no-nonsense style and an unflinching loyalty to wealthy executives. Vivian's approach was simple: attack, discredit, and minimize Eleanor's role. She intended to lean on the couple's prenuptial agreement, a document that on paper seemed to limit Eleanor's share should the marriage dissolve. But as Danielle Pierce liked to remind people in such high-stakes divorces, no prenup is bulletproof when moral turpitude and undisclosed assets come into play. Eleanor didn't attend the initial round of negotiations. Holding a newborn in a stuffy boardroom filled with adversaries was the last thing she wanted. Instead, she stayed in the comfort of her Brooklyn townhouse, nursing Henry, while Danielle and her associate Martin Feldman headed the talks. But the moment Danielle walked through those heavy glass doors, the tension was palpable. On one side of the long mahogany table, Marcus Donovan sat stiff-backed arms, folded protectively over his chest. His once impeccable confidence was fraying at the edges. Dark circles beneath his eyes hinted at nights lost to worry. The CFO of Donovan Capital, Daniel Redwood, a private confidant to Marcus for years, sat beside him in a pinstriped suit, methodically tapping a pen against a legal pad. Redwood's face gave nothing away, but the deeper lines on his brow suggested he knew exactly how precarious Marcus's position had become. Across from them was Danielle, impeccably dressed in a charcoal grey suit that seemed tailored to exude power. Her eyes flicked over the group in a cool, assessing glance, zeroing in on Marcus. "You did this to yourself, buddy," she seemed to say. Without uttering a word, Vivian Hill cleared her throat and began. "My client is prepared to offer a sizable monetary settlement," she said, handing out typed sheets. "We respect Mrs. Donovan's contributions, but we believe the prenuptial agreement stands." Danielle allowed herself a small, knowing smile. She flipped through the pages without so much as a pause and then calmly placed them on the table. "My client seeks more than a one-time payout. She seeks ongoing support for the child. Yes, but also recognition of the intangible support she gave to Donovan Capital. We have itemized evidence, emails, schedules, financial entries, showing how Mrs. Donovan facilitated multiple investor introductions and philanthropic partnerships that led to direct profitability for Donovan Capital." Vivian bristled but maintained her composure. "We dispute the scope of those contributions." Danielle's eyes narrowed. "Perhaps we should discuss the early loan from Mrs. Donovan's inheritance, which helped your client secure the original office space and cover those initial margin calls during Donovan Capital's first expansion phase. I believe the figure was." She checked a document, $250,000, hardly pocket change. "We also have Mr. Richard Albright, the couple's longtime financial advisor, ready to testify that Mrs. Donovan's involvement was fundamental to the firm's survival in its infancy. Marcus's expression darkened. He had hoped that early personal loan would remain a forgotten piece of ancient history, but Danielle was resurrecting every skeleton buried in Donovan Capital's closet. Even as the negotiations grew heated, an unspoken spectre hovered over the table. Juliana Moretti, the mistress whose presence had triggered the avalanche of scandal. Though physically absent from the boardroom, her impact was undeniable. Gossip rags still speculated about her rumored pregnancy. Investors quietly mulled whether Donovan Capital was hemorrhaging funds to appease her. And in hushed conversations, people wondered if Juliana might sell her story to a tell-all publication. As if on cue, Marcus's phone buzzed noisily, cutting through the tense silence. He glanced at it and his jaw tightened. Danielle raised an eyebrow. Vivian slammed a folder shut, irate at the interruption. "We need a moment," Vivian announced, escorting Marcus into an adjacent private lounge. Inside the lounge, Marcus exhaled heavily. He stared at the text from Juliana. "We have unfinished business. If you don't meet me tonight, I'll go public." It was a threat she'd lobbed before, but in the heat of divorce negotiations, the stakes were higher than ever. "Is it her?" Vivian asked, arms crossed. "Yeah," Marcus muttered, rubbing his temples. "She's threatening to spill everything if I don't." Vivian cut him off, voice low with frustration. "We don't have time for this. We're already negotiating from a position of weakness. Danielle Pierce has evidence that could shred your reputation if it goes to trial. If Juliana also goes to the media, it's over. You'll lose what little leverage you have left." Marcus felt a swell of anger mingle with defeat. He wanted to lash out, to break something, to be rid of Juliana and her manipulations. But he was caught trapped by the consequences of his own betrayal. "What do I do?" he asked, almost whispering. "Handle it," Vivian said sharply. "Shut her down. Get her to sign an NDA. Throw money at her if you must. But do not let her sabotage these negotiations." When they returned to the conference room, Danielle and Martin were exchanging quiet words. Danielle looked up, assessing Marcus's grim expression. She could guess Juliana had just made her presence known again. Good, Danielle thought. Let him squirm. It only strengthened her side of the table. The negotiations resumed, and over the course of the next 3 hours the atmosphere grew even heavier. Danielle meticulously dissected Donovan Capital's structure, pointing to subsidiary after subsidiary that had flourished because of philanthropic connections forged by Eleanor. She cited philanthropic galas, where Eleanor had introduced Marcus to major art patrons like Penelope Carnegie, who later became a silent investor. She had emails confirming Eleanor's role in persuading a West Coast museum patron to place $1 million trust with Donovan Capital. On and on it went, each bullet point chipping away at the notion that Eleanor was merely a supportive spouse with no legal claim. Marcus's lawyers attempted to minimize and deflect. "These are normal acts of spousal support," Vivian stated firmly. "They don't necessarily translate into equity stakes or managerial control." Danielle caught Marcus's gaze. "My client is not asking for half the company," she explained, voice firm but measured. "She wants an equitable share, reflecting the intangible contributions that were instrumental in turning Donovan Capital into the success it is today. Moreover, she wants a controlling interest in the philanthropic branch, which was largely her brainchild." Marcus's brow furrowed. The philanthropic branch. A small part of the firm, yes, but one with growing influence and positive press. Handing it over would mean giving Eleanor a permanent seat at the table of Donovan Capital's future. He imagined the headlines, "Eleanor Donovan heads, philanthropic ventures after high-profile divorce. It made him feel nauseous, but his options were dwindling by the second. Redwood leaned in and whispered something to Marcus, presumably about the potential damage to investor confidence if the negotiations dragged on. Marcus nodded curtly, then turned to Vivian. They shared a brief, tense exchange of whispers. Finally, Vivian laid down her pen. "We will consider this philanthropic branch as negotiable." Danielle's eyes flicked to Martin, a silent note of victory passing between them. The philanthropic division was not just a footnote in Donovan Capital's portfolio. It was a rising star, with significant press coverage for eco-friendly initiatives and socially responsible tech investments. Ceding control of it was a symbolic blow to Marcus's legacy. What followed was a grueling carousel of back-and-forth bartering. Marcus offered a one-time payout that would set Eleanor up for life. Danielle refused unless it included child support, reflecting the lifestyle Henry would have had if the marriage remained intact. When Marcus's team countered with a smaller monthly figure, Danielle threatened to reveal offshore accounts and questionable business practices. In open court, a guaranteed feeding frenzy for regulators and tabloids alike. Eleanor, following the negotiations from her home through text updates from Danielle, felt a swirl of emotions. Part of her despised the transactional nature of these talks. "This is my life," she thought. "My marriage." But there was no denying that wealth was a tool to secure a stable future for her son. She reminded herself that no amount of money could replace the trust Marcus had shattered, but it could ensure Henry never lacked for opportunity. Meanwhile, as the hours stretched, Marcus's phone kept buzzing. Juliana's messages grew more desperate. "Answer me or face the consequences." He battled the urge to throw his phone across the room. Danielle noticed his agitation and made a mental note that Juliana's tactics were likely driving him to make hurried decisions, an advantage for her client. At around 7 in the evening, both teams called for a recess, leaving the tables strewn with legal pads, half-empty coffee cups, and a storm of scattered documents. Marcus slumped in his chair, loosened his tie, and rubbed his eyes. In the hallway, Redwood took a phone call from the Donovan Capital Board, who demanded an update. The board was growing furious at the negative media coverage. They wanted this scandal tidied up faster. Danielle and Martin stepped into a private corner where they whispered about final strategies. "If we push him on philanthropic control, we can likely secure a stake in that ecotech subsidiary too." Martin suggested. Danielle nodded, eyes gleaming. With the board pushing Marcus to settle, he was more malleable to their demands. She drafted a quick bullet list on her tablet, preparing for one last push when they reconvened. An hour later, the negotiations climaxed. Vivian, clearly exasperated, announced, "We have a client who is willing to cooperate, but only if the settlement includes confidentiality clauses about Donovan Capital's internal finances." Danielle nodded. "We can include mutual NDAs on the finances, on the condition that Mrs. Donovan retains complete ownership of the philanthropic branch and partial equity in the ecotech spin-off." She handed over a revised agreement. "Sign this tonight, or we walk away and proceed to trial." Marcus locked eyes with Danielle, then lowered his gaze to the document. He knew this was the best offer he'd get. If he went to court, Danielle could drag out every skeleton in Donovan Capital's closet, not just the affair, but any shady financial corners he'd cut in the firm's early days. Share prices would plummet, and the board would oust him for good. He gave a weary nod to Vivian, who let out a resigned sigh and pushed the papers across the table. "Donovan," Vivian said, extending a pen sign here. Marcus gripped the pen, his gaze distant, as he scrawled his signature in the designated boxes. With each stroke of ink, a chunk of his empire slipped away. Danielle carefully collected the documents. "Thank you, Mr. Donovan," she said, her tone formal. She tapped them into a neat stack and placed them in her briefcase. "My client appreciates your cooperation, and I'll have the final copies delivered to you by tomorrow." Standing, Marcus thrust his hands into his pockets and stared at the floor. He'd never felt so powerless. The hush in the room was thick with finality. Later that night in her Brooklyn townhouse, Eleanor received a phone call from Danielle. "It's done," Danielle announced. "We have controlling interest of the philanthropic branch, partial equity in ecotech, sufficient child support, and a non-disclosure arrangement to protect your personal details. Henry will be well provided for, and you'll have the freedom to guide the philanthropy division. However you see fit." Eleanor closed her eyes, exhaling slowly. Relief mingled with a pang of sorrow. She'd stood up for herself and won. But it had come at the cost of accepting that her marriage and the man she'd once adored were lost to a web of lies and betrayal. Still, as she looked down at baby Henry, dozing in a bassinet nearby, she felt a flicker of hope. He would never want for stability or security. She had ensured that his future wasn't tied to Marcus's reckless choices. Across town, Marcus sat alone in his penthouse, now stripped of many personal touches, as Eleanor's belongings had been removed. The echoing silence was almost cruel. His phone buzzed again. Juliana, no doubt. He stared at the screen but couldn't bring himself to answer. His empire was in freefall, his reputation tarnished, and the only family he had now seemed beyond his reach. He sank into a leather armchair, head in his hands, as the lights of the city stretched out below him in apathetic indifference. The legal war was over, but the aftermath would ripple for years. In the eyes of the world, Eleanor had seized a critical piece of Donovan Capital's future, an accomplishment that would soon send her star rising in philanthropic and business circles alike. Marcus, once hailed as a visionary titan, watched his kingdom fracture under the weight of his own hubris. And somewhere out there, in the swirl of scandal and secrecy, Juliana Moretti plotted her next move, determined to claim whatever she could from the empire's wreckage. But for Eleanor, the greatest triumph was not the money or even the philanthropic branch. It was reclaiming her autonomy, proving that she was more than just a shadow in Marcus's ambitious world. The settlement marked an end, yet for her and Henry, it was also the quiet beginning of a far more authentic life, one built on the unshakable foundation of self-respect and unconditional love. In the weeks after the settlement, life moved at a breathless pace. Marcus attempted damage control with his board, reassuring them that Donovan Capital Ventures still had strong leadership. However, the trust between him and his key partners was irrevocably eroded. Several major investors parted ways, citing moral and reputational concerns. Others demanded restructuring that further diluted Marcus's control. Juliana's claims of pregnancy were eventually discredited. She had never provided legitimate proof, and many suspected it was a ploy, jilted and humiliated. She slinked off to Europe, facing her own set of gossip. By contrast, Eleanor found a surprising sense of renewal. She relocated to a serene townhouse in a family-friendly neighborhood in Brooklyn. With her parents' help, she furnished the space so it exuded warmth and creativity. Local artwork on the walls, a cozy reading nook by the window, and a sunlit nursery for Henry between breastfeeding late-night lullabies and the occasional meltdown. She felt more alive than ever. There was sadness still for the broken dreams and the man she once loved. But she also felt unshackled free to chart her own course. Despite not being a ruthless business tycoon, Eleanor found herself thrust into an unexpected position of power. The philanthropic branch of Donovan Capital that she controlled needed direction, and she gave it wholeheartedly. She rebranded it as the Green Horizon Fund, focusing on eco-sustainability, social justice initiatives, and arts in underprivileged communities. She hired a small team of like-minded individuals, some from Marcus's circle, who felt more aligned with her vision. In an ironic twist, the Green Horizon Fund quickly garnered positive media attention, drawing in philanthropic entrepreneurs who had grown skeptical of traditional profit-obsessed finance. Financially secure from the divorce settlement, Eleanor didn't have to scramble for revenue. Instead, she invested her emotional energy in building a legacy that Henry could be proud of. The mother who once quietly supported her husband's dream now became a leader in her own right. And the world noticed, meanwhile. Marcus struggled in the shadows. The scandal's aftershock still rippled through the corporate world, making every new partnership a challenge. He sold off some properties to maintain the liquidity needed to stabilize Donovan Capital. Investors demanded transparency, and he spent sleepless nights just trying to preserve what was left. The flamboyant lifestyle he once enjoyed with private jets and lavish parties was replaced by frantic, damage-controlled dinners and closed-door negotiations. The final blow, Karma's crowning moment, arrived when a whistleblower from Juliana's circle leaked incriminating details of Marcus's offshore accounts and questionable business practices. Though not entirely illegal, the revelations cast serious doubts on his ethics. Regulators launched inquiries. The board forced him to temporarily step down as CEO, installing an interim figurehead to steer Donovan Capital until the dust settled. Marcus, once the unstoppable force in the world of high finance, found himself drowning in self-inflicted misery. He tried to see Henry when he could court-ordered visitation schedules. Sometimes he'd gaze at his son in the crib, marveling at how pure and untainted the child was by the swirling chaos. In those tender, wordless moments, he realized the depth of his miscalculation. He had gained the world in fleeting fame and fortune, but lost the loyalty of a good woman, the stability of a solid family, and the respect of those who once admired him. Eleanor, on the other hand, glowed with the fulfillment of someone who had found her path, albeit through heartbreak. She no longer carried the illusions of a fairy tale marriage. Instead, she stood firm on a foundation of self-worth, maternal devotion, and a dream that had become her own to shape. She was far from perfect. Late nights still brought sorrowful memories, and the weight of single parenthood was immense. But each step forward, every milestone in the Green Horizon Fund and every coo or giggle from Henry reminded her that she was not just surviving. She was thriving. In the end, the story of Marcus Donovan's baby moon betrayal was overshadowed by a far more compelling narrative. The remarkable resilience of Eleanor Donovan, the woman who refused to be a victim of circumstance. She had taken the shattered pieces of her marriage and transformed them into building blocks for a future she could proudly call her own. The empire that Marcus once claimed as his birthright was now reshaped by the very person he had betrayed, and the world applauded the justice in that reversal of fortune. In this whirlwind saga of infidelity, heartbreak, and karmic justice, we've witnessed how a man's towering ambitions and insatiable desires can unravel everything he cherishes. From the moment Marcus Donovan betrayed his pregnant wife to the day she claimed a defining stake in his empire, destiny proved that true power lies not in wealth, but in loyalty, trust, and resilience. Eleanor's journey, rising from the ashes of humiliation to build a life of purpose and success, reminds us that no betrayal is ever the final chapter, and redemption often favors the strong of heart.